current situation in the healthcare system in Zimbabwe has collapsed.
Do you trust President Mnangagwa to make things better?
There's no jobs, there's no money, there's no foodstuffs.
Millions of Zimbabweans go to bed hungry, dependent on handouts for survival. This country is on the brink of catastrophe. Zimbabwe's infrastructure is crumbling. 2 million people in Harare have been without piped water for months.
Rolling blackouts last up to 18 hours a day. These power cuts have cost manufacturers more than $200 million in lost production since June. And the country's economy, initially forecast to grow 3.1%, is now expected to contract. It's not just businesses being affected either. Mother of 4, Cynthia Chabuino, has had to turn her household routine around, ironing and cooking in the evenings. She is one of scores who walk each night to a nearby electric-powered borehole to fetch water to use at home.
This is a huge strain. Power comes late in the night when I'm supposed to be sleeping and resting, but I have to wake up and do household chores like fetching water and ironing. It's unbearable.
The government says it plans to import power from its neighbours for the short term and expand and build new generation plants in the future. But in addition to power cuts, it's also grappling with shortages of fuel, medicines and bread.
Richard is 86 and destitute, even though he worked and saved for his retirement all his life.
I sold my house, invested the money, and that was it. I got nothing now.
Just imagine what it must be like to work hard all your life and then face desperate poverty in your twilight years. Richard is just one of thousands of elderly Zimbabweans who have been robbed of their right to grow old with dignity.
In a northern suburb of the capital, Harare, Grace lives with her sister Michelle and her father Joseph. When I was their age, education was everything. But life is so much harder for these girls.
Una marching na 2009 tikatanga kudzingirwa kuti vangosinaubhadhara vese vangosinaubhadhara mari yeschool fees wese asina kubhadhara anjenda unotora mari kana usina haudzoke kunoko unodzoka kana waone mari yacho. School fees yedu inoita if $10 per term. Mari inobhadharwa nababa $30. Vakati kana ndaona mari ndichakubhadhara.
With 95% unemployment in this area and the economy in shreds, the only way for the family to earn enough to eat, let alone pay school fees, is for the girls to help their father scour rubbish tips for bottles.
Sigeleli Afrika malupakan Yesu pondolwayo izwa imitandazo yetu ngosi sigelela ngosi sigelela ngosi sigeleli Afrika malupakan Yesu pondolwayo izwa imitandazo yetu ngosi sigelela tina lusapolwayo wozamoyo.
$1 billion. His wife Grace Mugabe is Zimbabwe's wealthiest woman, but nobody knows exactly how wealthy they are, since a lot of their wealth is confidential and undeclared. What we do know is that they own the biggest house in Zimbabwe, a collection of farms, land, custom-made luxury cars, and assets outside the country as well. A good look at the president's wife, Gucci Grace, also tells us that the couple have a lot of money. Grace, also known as the first shopper of Zimbabwe, reportedly spent $131,000 during a shopping spree in Paris. This was at a time when over 7 million Zimbabweans were starving. She even bought a $1 million diamond ring in Dubai last year. Before her marriage to the president, she even reportedly used government funds to build her mansion, Gracelands. Opponents have accused the couple of squandering Zimbabwe's national wealth on their own investments.
Behind me are the Marange diamond fields. Every one of us here hopes to benefit from the diamond mining that is happening just down there. We hope they were going to transform our lives. But with allegations of corruption flying around, that hope seems to be fading so fast. Marvin Mudiwa lives near the mines and is a community leader. The surrounding region is one of the most impoverished in the country, desperate for the development that the profits from the diamonds could bring. But he, like everyone else in the area, has become depressed by the ongoing reports of corruption.
So when this diamond came, it came as a God-given gift. We thought now, here we are going to benefit from jobs, infrastructure. We thought maybe our roads were going to improve so that generations and generations will benefit. But what is happening, honestly, it's a shame.
But it is not only locals who believe that corruption is dogging the industry. Since the formation of the coalition governments at the last election in 2008, control of the government ministries was divided between President Robert Mugabe's ZANU-PF party and the former opposition party, the Movement for Democratic Change. While Mugabe made sure that he continued to control the mines, he was forced to relinquish control of the Ministry of Finance. Now, tensions between the two ministries are reaching boiling point. And according to the Zimbabwean Minister of Mines, at the current production level capacity, these fields have got the ability to generate $2 billion every year for the country's struggling economy. But the Minister of Finance, Tendai Biti, says much of the money coming out of these fields is finding its way into the pockets of individuals. No longer with direct access to the country's treasury, local and international NGOs fear that Mugabe is using the diamond money to maintain his grip on power. Back in Harare, I asked the minister what evidence he had to prove the money was being stolen.
Well, the only evidence I have is that we're not getting the money. We have got evidence of the quantities that are being mined, the quantities that are being exported, but nothing is coming to the fiscus.
I asked the minister where he thought the money was going.
I don't know where it's going. All I know is that it's not coming to treasury. So that's a self-evident question. It's not coming to us. That means someone is getting it. And that person who is not getting it illegal. therefore he's a thief, therefore she's a thief.
But I think after the August 1st shootings, things just started to go down the drain then, because the government's response to protests and demonstrations by the opposition have been too heavy-handed. And I think in some ways the government has fallen trap to, and I think the opposition knew this, right? That if we demonstrate, they're going to bring out their worst. And so maybe unwittingly, the government has sort of fallen to the trap of showing their worst hand when they could have handled protests in a more diplomatic way. I also understand that some banks in China have put Zimbabwe under sanctions, under concerns regarding corruption. And we haven't seen Emmerson Mnangagwa deal effectively with corruption since coming into office. I think if he had done that, that's something that could have brought him more credit from the people. If he had addressed corruption, if he had addressed the millions of dollars that are missing. There's only been one person who's been arrested so far, but when you talk to Zimbabweans, people think that she is just a scapegoat. People think that there are some big fish that are still swimming in the government that haven't been dealt with. And so, Emmerson Mnangagwa's inability to deal with corruption, his willingness to send out soldiers whenever there are protests, whenever people speak out, I think that's really eroded any trust that he was hoping to build within Zimbabwe itself.
But do we know how much this alleged fraud and corruption in terms of the amount is being investigated at this stage?
Well, remember, these are different tenders at different points in time. They started off in 2019, way before the coronavirus pandemic.
Right.
But we understand there was a $42 million tender. There is another 60 million. So really the figures we yet to hear once the charges have been formally pressed against the minister.
Effort, thank you very much indeed for joining us here on The Full View. SABC correspondent in Harare, Zimbabwe, Effort Musikiwa, with some breaking news there. The Minister of Health in that country has been arrested for alleged fraud and corruption. He was picked up this evening, according to Effort there, and it's understood that he will appear in court shortly, perhaps on Monday, if I heard Effort Musikiwa correctly there. That's some breaking news coming out of Zimbabwe, and the president's son in that country distancing himself from the company which is linked to this alleged corruption.
However, self-made millionaire Philip Chiangwa says there's lots of gold, glory and glamour here too. This Zimbabwean business mogul is not shy about flaunting his vast wealth. He drives expensive luxury cars and lives in a palatial house with 18 bedrooms and 25 lounges. Tell us, a lot of people, when they think of Zimbabwe, they don't really think of the sort of wealth that we see shown in this room. They really think of the negative stereotype: hunger, poverty, famine, suffering.
We have Zach, and now they have a new leader there. That's Lois Matanda Moyo. We also have 8 new commissioners. Now, all of them are going to need the tools to work with. We've had a few good laws recently that should help our corruption busters fight crime. Now, let's go through some of them real quick. Number 1, we now have the Statutory Instrument 143 of 2019. What does this do? It gives Zach arresting powers. Before this, Zach could only report their findings to the police. They couldn't arrest anyone. Number 2, we all know procurement processes where the real corruption is. But there's the Public Procurement and Disposable of Public Assets Act. Now, last year, the State Procurement Board was replaced by the Procurement Regulatory Authority of Zimbabwe. Now, this makes it harder for people to play the system. Number 3, there's the Money Laundering and Proceeds of Crime Act. Now, what does it do? If Zach or Zimra see you boarding around town with a big car, or if they check your account and see a big pile of cash, now they have the power to ask where you got your money. Now, we've seen this law being used already. The former boss of Zinara had his assets seized under this law. The police have what they call the Asset Forfeiture Unit. He's under investigation for fraud, so they froze his assets. Now, we also saw another Harare guy being asked to explain $1 million in his account. Number 4, we now have specialized corruption courts, 5 of them. Now, there's a big backlog of cases in our courts. The anti-corruption courts were supposed to make sure that corruption cases are tried quickly without being caught up in some queue. Well, we need to see this happening. Number 5, there's the Public Entities Corporate Governance Act. Now, this is supposed to clean up the way we run our parastatals. So, the tools are there. What we now need to see is the tools actually being used. We haven't seen it so far. It's not easy, we know, but even the president said so himself. This is what ED said recently. Once you get past the corruption in the police, the National Prosecuting Authority has to prosecute. Then there are also elements of corruption in the NPA. Then the case must go to the court, and there are also elements of corruption in the judiciary. So, the fight is wide and deep. It's a tough job, but it must be done. And as we've shown you, we don't have a shortage of corruption-fighting institutions. We have lots of them. What we want to see is political will to see them to work. Now, we need our prosecutors to be on point. We have had many arrests, but very little convictions. No wonder some are calling this catch and release. So,
in all, it's estimated $5 billion was embezzled under Abacha's rule and moved to various offshore accounts overseas, including Switzerland. Now, the Nigerian government has so far recovered $1 billion of the siphoned funds with the help from the World Bank.
The normal rules of asset recovery and return, they just don't apply here because that money will be used to torture people. That money will be used for human rights violations because human rights violations is what they use to coerce the bribery.
The Boda Fund was established in Kazakhstan. It was an agreement between the governments of Kazakhstan, Switzerland, and the United States. The countries agreed through negotiations to use the repatriated assets from a corrupt scheme to fund NGOs and programs that help reduce children's poverty.
$322.52 million recovered Abacha loot to be plowed to the accounts of poor Nigerians. The Special Assistant to the President on Justice, Juliet Ibeka Kunwagu, made the disclosure in a chat with journalists. The government is making final preparations to disburse $322 million fund repatriated from the accounts of former head of state, late General Sani Abacha in Switzerland, to Nigerians. The government plans to be sending the money directly to the accounts of poor Nigerians within a 2-year period. The aid also stated that this will be done through identification numbers on the website. The poorest members of the community will be registered online, and before you can make any payment, they must have an ID number so that every payment will be tracked. She solicited the patience of Nigerians, explaining that the agencies working on the modalities will brief the public on June 28. The process will be transparent for the civil society and the media to monitor.
Another guilty verdict has been handed down to Imelda Marcos, the infamous former First Lady turned Congresswoman. A special anti-graft court in Quezon sentenced her to 6 to 11 years in prison for each of 7 counts of violating an anti-corruption law when she illegally funneled about $200 million overseas in the 1970s.
We're going to be discussing asset recovery, and we're going to be looking at the NCA case. Now, it should be recalled that on May 12, 2020, a judgment by an Accra High Court presided over by His Lordship Eric Che Bafo, Justice of the Court of Appeal, sitting as an additional High Court judge, sentenced 3 persons to a collective 16 years in prison. By that judgment, Justice Che Bafo, he sentenced 3 of the 5 persons, all of them being from the National Communication Authority or former staff of the National Communication Authority. Now, they are accused of corruption in the clandestine purchase of supposed cyber security equipment for the National Communication Authority. Now, in his judgment, Justice Che Bafo gave an order for the seizure of the assets of the convicted persons to the tune of $3 million. The seized assets are to be forfeited to the state, which of course is Ghana in this case. Now, Justice Che Bafo also ordered the Attorney General to take steps to enforce his judgment.
Staying in South Korea, the Seoul High Court has reduced the prison sentence for former South Korean President Park Geun-hye. The 8-year-old now has to complete a jail term of 15 years for bribery and another 5 years for abuse of power and other criminal charges. She's also fined $15 million. Prior to Friday's hearing, Park was serving a combined 30-year prison term at Seoul Detention Center. She was ousted in March 2017 amid a scandal involving abuse of power and corruption.
Sigeleli Africa, malupakan Yesu pondolwayo, izwa imitandazo yetu, ngosi sigelela, ngosi sigelela, ngosi sigeleli Africa, malupakan Yesu pondolwayo, izwa imitandazo